Hello again, and welcome to Chapter 4, the Conditioned Behavioral Response. In this chapter, we will be exploring your very own unique set of coping strategies that you've picked up and adapted along the way in your life. So now that we have a better grasp of the relationship between our thoughts and our bodies, let's have a look at how our behaviors can keep us stuck in our cycle of fear and disconnected from ourselves and the people we love. When our thoughts are telling us we're in danger and our bodies are telling us we're in danger, we start behaving as though we're actually in danger. In other words, our coping strategies kick in. For most of us, this pattern of behavior has become so automatic that we aren't even aware that we're doing it. But in reality, we're often following a coping strategy that we devised years ago as a way to keep us safe in our relationship with other people. You may have your one tried and tested go-to trauma response that you make use of every time, or you might have more of a smorgasbord of responses depending on the particular situation at hand. So for instance, there might be times like when your husband forgets to pick up the milk again, where you're feeling maybe a little bit more combative and likely to resort to fighting as your trauma response. And there might be other times, like maybe when your kid is throwing a tantrum, that you're more inclined to pour yourself an extra large glass of wine. This would fall under the flight response. So these aren't exclusive categories, but they do help us recognize the patterns that we tend to fall into more often than not when we're operating from the yellow, fearful headspace zone. But the key in all of this is not to judge yourself too much. You are not your maladaptive coping mechanisms. You're not your addiction, you're not your temper, you're not people pleasing, you're not your shame or your guilt or your anxiety. These are all just simply strategies that have served you really well and kept you safe for years. So don't judge yourself for having them. We all have them, and we all resort to them when we don't feel safe or when we feel threatened or insecure or scared. So let's try to accept that our coping mechanisms do exist. It's just the thing that we do sometimes. And we may as well get to know them a little bit better, possibly even make friends with them. As the saying goes, what you befriend, you transcend. So I'll touch on all of them briefly, and you can try to figure out which coping strategy or assortments of coping strategies you might tend to resort to most often. You can follow along in your workbook from pages 14 to 17 and circle the behaviors that you recognize in yourself. Okay, so let's jump in. First, there's the fighting instinct. You sense danger, or somebody has disrespected you, or you feel ignored or attacked, and you retaliate. You feel angry and you need to express this verbally. You're quick to blame others when something happens that upsets you, and you need them to understand what they've done wrong and take accountability for their actions so that it doesn't happen again, usually. You believe in the principle of fairness, and you feel angry when people do not contribute or do their fair share. Letting people get away with bad behavior is a sign of weakness, and some people might describe you as being critical of them, but often you're just trying to point out what they've done wrong. So if any of this kind of resonates with you or sounds familiar to you, you might use fighting as a coping strategy or a defense mechanism. The next category is flight. You sense danger, and your immediate instinct is to try to get away from the uncomfortable situation and restore peace. Often, people with addiction issues tend to fall into this category. You try to withdraw from conflict and you choose to self-soothe. So, do anything that'll make yourself feel better rather than address the issue head on. You tend to want to avoid feeling angry or uncomfortable in certain situations. Sometimes you'll say things that you might not actually mean just to keep the peace. You have used one of the following methods to distract yourself from feeling uncomfortable: shopping, drinking, exercising, working, gaming, watching TV, scrolling on social media, basically just avoiding. The next category is fawning, my personal favorite, also known as people pleasing. It comes from a sense of not feeling safe with the people around you. So you put your needs on hold in order to meet the needs of those around you. Because as the logic goes, if their nervous system can be regulated and if their needs are met, then only then can you feel safe. So people who are susceptible to fall into codependent relationships tend to be people pleasers. If you're really good at anticipating other people's needs and you find yourself jumping to meet them, you might be a people pleaser. And when other people's needs become more important than your own, or sometimes you might not even know what your needs are, or you have a really hard time identifying your own needs, you might be a people pleaser. And the last category is simply to freeze or play dead. This is also referred to as shutdown mode. It happens when the level of stress has become too overwhelming and fighting or fleeing or phoning are just no longer available to you. Or sometimes you just go straight to shut down. This can also be associated with dissociation, which is a common response to trauma. So this behavioral response often happens when your nervous system is in the red zone. You can feel as though you have brain fog. Sometimes feeling numb is the only thing that you can feel. If you failed a big test or had a big fight with someone, sometimes you'll just lie on the couch for hours, staring at the ceiling, just kind of zoning out. And sometimes it just feels better to hide from the world. If you can relate to any of this stuff, you might be using freezing as a coping mechanism or strategy for survival. So in pages 15 to 18 in your workbooks, the characteristics of each coping mechanism are outlined. Take some time to look over the responses and circle any that you see yourself doing regularly, sporadically, when you're not feeling completely safe in a situation. You might even want to check with other people who know you really well and ask them what they notice you using, whether any of these strategies they've noticed that you tend to use when you're under stress. So take a little bit of time to reflect, ask for some feedback from your loved ones, and when you're ready, meet me back here for chapter 5.